Peace and blessings, family. My name is Baba J, Dr. R.o.j.o Muid, and I am honored to be in your presence, in your space. The work that I have found out that you've been doing is incredible. And of course, the watchword is Afrofuturism. We have to see ourselves in the future with our families, with our communities, with our people, being the world leader that we are. So it's wonderful to be here. I would like to ask Brother Rojo, how much time do I have? I don't want to be too wordy or too lengthy, but I need to know how much time do I have that's comfortable.
Floor is yours, family. Do your thing.
Oh, okay, all right. So a little bit about myself, son of Sylvia Oliver and Thomas Oliver, uh, father of my husband, I'm a grandfather, and I've been on this orbit now for 71 years. And as a result of that, of course, I picked up some wisdom along the way, some perspectives. And I think what's probably is most notable is that I was raised in the time, I'm going to go back to 1968, when James Brown came out with Stay Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. For those of you who are much younger than myself, you would have no idea of how groundbreaking that was, because up until that time, black was fighting words. You call somebody black, that means you about to fight. In fact, it was so derogatory that when we used to call, or other people used to call our women the B word, for you to dig it in to make it really effective, you would call a black so and so and so. So to be born in a time when that was this epiphany, it was truly revolution of Black consciousness. And from that time, fast forward, I've looked into the hurt, the pain, the suffering of our people. And as a result of that, I became involved with the reparations movement. So currently, I serve as the male co-chair of NCOBRAS, that's the National Coalition of Blacks Reparations in America Health Commission, as well as the co-chair of the National Association of Black Social Workers National Relations Committee, and a few other organizations, but those are two major roles that I'm playing. But also, I'm the founder of Wahine Misu Healing Well, and the name Wahine Misu is a Kemet word that means rebirth. It means reconnecting to oneself in the spirit of Ma'ad, of order, balance, and harmony, reciprocity, truth, and justice, and compassion. And as a result of that, all these things are really talking about the love and the healing of our people. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've done. My master thesis was Then I Lost My Spirit, an analytical essay on transgenerational trauma theory and its application to people of color nations, particularly looking at the Lakota Nation and looking at the New African Nation. And then for my doctorate, I continued that work looking for a solution, a healing to historical trauma. And there I discovered a modality that's called psychodrama. I'm going to shut my mic off for a minute while I cough. Excuse me. I'm hoping that you can see the throne that I'm sitting on. Thought you would like to see that. I'm at a spa, in fact, uh, in um, in New Jersey, that has all these different saunas that you can go into with all kind of minerals, gold, and so many different things. Amethyst, have the crystals, something, of course, that we need to own ourselves. But in the meantime, we'll go where we can locate it. So healing historical trauma through psychodrama. And I had mentioned in Cobra, and I'm hoping that everyone is going to get the report. It's called "The Harm is to Our Genes." This was back in what, 2020, and we did work with John Hopkins, some researchers there, to look at this question of how the trauma has been passed down from one generation to the next. When we look at our history, I'm just going, this is abbreviated. Of course, we was here with, we've been here, first of all. And in addition to that, Abu Bakari, when he came in, what, 1200? But we're going to just look at 1619 for right now, right? So we're looking at a period of time, 1619 to 1885, chattel slavery, all types of horrors that had never been experienced by any people in the world ever. And we did that for all those many years. And then, of course, right after 1865, so-called emancipation, which it wasn't, it was just a transformation. Of course, the 13th Amendment said slavery and voluntary servitude is abolished, except in the case of what? A punishment of a crime. We never got judged by our peers, so forth and so on. So we go from chattel slavery to 13th, to convict leasing, to sharecropper, to peonage, to Jim Crow, right into mass incarceration. So nothing has changed. It's been the same reality. That is the purpose of domination, subjugation for the purpose of exploitation. And now we are in a situation where we fully understand all the dynamics. We always knew that all the things they did to us using terror was for the purpose of fear and subjugation. We knew that, but we never had a science to actually explain it, and now we do. So this brother here, a good friend of mine, says that. Let me move the screen up a little bit. He says that Zimbabwe Belanca filed the first of its kind reparations petition to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Even though the case was dismissed, we're still getting closer to actually having what is called standing. The United States is guilty of state-sanctioned ethnocide, Belanca said, referring to the deliberate and systematic destruction of our cultures. We are living as victims of it today. And for the first time in human history, because of DNA testing, we can actually recover from ethnocide. So this is moving us into this discussion of the effects of the Ma'afa, right? Ma'afa is a key Swahili word that means the great tragedy. And if we look at it from 1619 to 2019, right? What's that, 400 years? Um, that's like 20 generations of people who have been under constant attack, under constant assault, and internalizing this trauma each generation. So when we talk about genes or DNA, we're talking about um, how the genes express themselves and how they're activated. So epigenetics is a relatively new science that says that it's not a question of nature or nurture, as people were saying many, many years, probably before many of you was born. There was this, is it nature, is it nurture, is it nature, is it nurture? Well, actually, it's both, right? It's both. So epigenetics says that if there's a negative environment, it's going to affect the brain development of the child at a very early age. So we can see that we can be disadvantaged from the very beginning of the child's life, and even prior to that, inside the womb, when the woman is in the period of gestation, that if she's under stress, and now Black women are, that she was, in fact, will be passing those same hormones to the embryo. So the embryo is growing in a state of confusion and unsafety. Now, as this is true, we also know that knowing what happened to us through certain mechanisms through epigenetics, we can also now find the solutions how to reverse that. We're going to talk about that a little later. But the concept of historical trauma um, was first coined by my dear friend, Dr. Maria Yellow Horse, great thought, Yellow Horse. And she is a phenomenal Lakota woman who did her doctorate on this subject. To date, my understanding, she's the only one who has actually had the permission and used the so-called academy to actually study it. Yes, Dr. Joy DeGruy has studied it, but I'll talk about her in a moment. But looking at Maria's definition, she says it's a collective and emotional and psychological injury both over the lifespan and across generations. So it's through in the lifespan of when you're living, but over the generations above you and below you, resulting from a cataclysmic history of genocide. And for us, this also is true as well. It's not just slavery that we enjoy genocide as well. So Maria says that many of the things we look as the problem, be it drug abuse, be it sexual, child sexual assault, all these different things, right? Domestic violence. She said that's not the problem. She said those are the effects coming out of the legacy of genocide, and of course, also the legacy of slavery. So, what are the effects? Unsettled trauma, increased child abuse, all the social conditions in which we're living is a result of unresolved historical trauma. Let's see, we'll go to the next slide. So, probably many of you know the work of Dr. Joy DeGruy. Her book was Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Her story is a little different than Maria's, had the same interests and intent, but when she wanted to do this study when under her first degree, which was psychology, they refused her. They wouldn't give her permission to do it. So then she went to social work thinking that she would get uh, a more wider open receptions. She did not. So she had to use post-traumatic slave syndrome as an explanation to show the behavior that people were going through. So it's different than when you're using it as the framework of your dissertation itself versus having to use it as an explanation. All the work is still relevant and it's still pertinent and it's extremely significant, but we do want to draw the difference. So Joy, Dr. DeGruy says that post-traumatic slavery is a theory that explains the ideology, the history of many of the adaptive survival behaviors in African American communities and throughout the United States and the diaspora. So she says adaptive survival behavior is interesting, right? She didn't say uh, diseased or malfunctions. And this is so important for us to begin to use the principle of Kujichagulia, right? Self-determination, where we define what our reality is. In the medical terms, they call it nosology. Nosology is the science that says what are the difficulties or maladapted ways that people are adjusting to harsh conditions. Dr. Gru goes on to say it's a condition that exists as a consequence of multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants, resulting from slaveries of chattel slavery. So we have a better handle on the Ma'afa than we ever had before, and the conditions are getting worse. So it's the two realities exist at the same time. I'm not going to go into all the details of this chart, which is called Historical Social Health Overview, but I'm giving you a view, um, a prism through which you can see how these things very well may be connected. And I'm looking at these different levels as um, planes of existence. So most of our people are living on the top level, maybe the top and second level. That is, we see people, we say hello, we say goodbye, we do whatever we do, right? That's the lived experience. But underneath that, it's already coming out of a survival culture that Dr. DeGru just mentioned, right? I call it induced survival culture because culture to be yours has to be generative, has to be embracing, has to be informative, has to be encouraging. So when you are oppressed, when the people are oppressed, they're denied that right. In fact, that's the second wall in which we lost. And now our work is to regain our ability to define our culture. So in induced survival culture, that is coming into existence out of what? Out of the cultural pain from a people of oppression. And that, in fact, is no more than the effect of what historical trauma. So the bottom rung speaks to the causational level, right? So uh, Marimba Ani speaks about living in Ma'at or truth, forgetting, and then reclaiming ourselves through Sankofa. So look at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. 12 o'clock being Ma'at, being truth, forgetting ourselves, and then having to affirm Sankofa, to go back and retrieve what you lost. And then once we fully evolve or reinstate that, then we move back into Ma'at at 6 o'clock, and then we forget again. And then, so she said that was the cycles that many of our civilizations were in. But of course, that was interrupted through the Ma'afa, right? The transatlantic enslavement period. So now our people are pretty much in the state of Sankofa right now, and the uh, the Ma'afa still continues. It's not over. We can walk outside and we can see our people sleeping in the street. We can see our children being snatched up by what is called Administration of Child Services, right? We can look at all the conditions and see that oppression is still real and alive, which is the Ma'afa. So what this chart does is give us a way of looking at where we at in our recovery process, in our healing process. And at a later time, I'd like to just spend some time just on this chart alone. This was one of the things that came through from the ancestors that gave me a picture of the ways in which social reality occurs. So our work is to gain wellness, is to create, improve our social ecology, right? We think about ecology in terms of the world, the physical environment, but there's also the social ecology, which is equally important, which is the aspect of reparations, which is called rehabilitation. So what do we want? We want wellness, right? We can say wellness is a positive outcome that is meaningful for people in the many sectors of society. Now, our sector of society is a sector that is existing in what is called domestic colonialism. And if we look at all our neighborhoods are no more than micro domestic colonies. We don't control our politics, we don't control our economics, we have the worst health conditions, and we have the highest rent, the highest uh, expenses, right? So our work is to find a solution to the problem. What is the problem? The problem is the Ma'afa. What is the solution? The solution is for us to take our health, our mental, physical, spiritual, cultural, social health in our own hands and recreate a lifestyle that is going to survive forever and ever and ever. In this report, um, two sections I'm going to point out. One is section 6. This 6 section discusses factors that can mitigate the effects of historical and personal trauma and promote strength and resilience. We must become experts on our healing and our wealth. Wahimi Misu, the nonprofit, says we need a healer and a healing well in every home. We need a healer and a healing well in every home, because having a healer is wonderful, but we can't disintegrate the healers with so much work to do. So they need to get replenished. So it must be a replenishing cycle that can only happen if there's a well where one can be constantly restored. So the number seven of this this little booklet is the 7 section delineates policies, practice, and research recommendations to address systematic racism. It's not only racism that we must address. Racism is just a means to an end. It's a tool. What is the tool for? Is to continue our subjugation, which is to what maintain the domestic colonies in which we live. So we don't want to get confused by treating the symptom and not treating the cause. The cause of our problem, the real problem, is our captivity, which is held under colonialism, domestic colonialism in particular. So if we go to looking at some of the ways in which we can see the different ingredients or the different involvements in which we are as a people engaged in, we can see how the solutions are starting to evolve. And Cobra says that there's at least five punishment areas that we want to look at and understand and to solve. One, the first one is peoplehood and nationhood. A people without declaring themselves a nation will be treated as individuals. We have to move beyond the political naivety that we find ourselves in and become politically mature, which means we must demand ourselves as being not just a group of individuals, but as a nation. And a nation is different than a nation state. We even have a right to a nation state. And this is in the United Nations. It's called I think it's Special Committee 15 that speaks about the process of decolonization. So the second area of harm is in education. The third is health. The fourth is wealth, connected to, of course, poverty. And then the fifth is criminal justice. Those are the five. And there's more areas, but we figure that we'll start with those five. And then there are work that we're doing, and we invite you to join in COBRA so that we can fully populate these commissions so that we can start to talk about the solutions. It's not enough to describe the problem, to be descriptive of the problem. We must move beyond that, and we must become descriptive to the solution. Sometimes that's called a critical evaluation, when you have both the description of the problem, but also the solution. So in COBRA is engaging in that work. We think that one of our major accomplishment is this harm report, because it gives us a blueprint to not only look to the past to see what has happened to us, but also to look towards the future. So we're talking about general public health. How now do we start to think about public health as something that we own, not that the government owns, but we own it. But it takes a mindset in order to own that. It was Frantz Fanon who said each generation, out of its own relative obscurity, must discover its own mission, either to fulfill or portray. And obviously, this generation has been given this task because we are thinking in such broad terms. It's almost like a second revolution. If I referenced 1968 in terms of James Brown, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. But young people today, like yourselves, have more understanding and appreciation of their blackness, of our blackness, than any other population, in terms of the ages that you are and the continued years in which you are holding on to that. But you're going to find out, maybe, hopefully, maybe you won't, but you're going to find out possibly that many of the people that are very conscious right now, they say woke, you're going to see them drifting back, because the pressure to assimilate and to return to Eurocentric point of view is so vast and dense, that many of our greatest speakers and leaders find themselves pulled back into that trap. So pay attention. So part of your work is, how do you keep your own consciousness, yes, your African consciousness, but how then are you going to keep those around you who now are your peers? How are you going to hold on to them to keep them moving forward? I can speak on many examples of the force that's pulling us back, right? So even when you're moving from the Ma'afa into Sankofa, you're going to see people being pulled back into the Ma'afa. So epigenetics, transgenerational inheritance is speaking about how the trauma has been passed down in the gene structure. When we one example, and I think one area that the two areas that I work on, I work in a few areas, but the two main areas that I work in is infant mortality prevention and maternal mortality prevention. Uh, Black women are dying in some places like Brooklyn 15 times the rate of white women having a baby in Brooklyn. In other parts in around the city, it's at least 4 times the rate in which white women are dying. It's not an epidemic. An epidemic suggests that there was some state of stability prior to this, and then something happened to make it go into this, exaggerated state. This has been the constant state, so it's not a crisis. It's a continual state of oppression, which is called the constant in mathematics. So one area I work with is infant and maternal mortality prevention. The other area I spend most of my time is gun violence prevention. So if we look at gun violence, and I'm saying these are consequences of historical trauma. When the body is sick, all the parts of the body is sick, is ill, right? So for people who are living in domestic colonialism, of course you could expect there are going to be negative effects in every aspect of their lives. So this is the two aspects in which I spend time with. The conditions are going to cause um, gun violence, easy access, of course, high inequality, concentrated poverty, underfunded public housing, under-resourced public services, and the list goes on and on, right? And this is the thing where I think some of you are going to be surprised. It was Dr. Martin Luther King who said, we must recognize that Black people are living in domestic colony. King said this in 1967, but I don't even think you've heard it because most people don't really know King. King was in Ghana in 1958 when Ghana became a nation state. King. Now think about it. 1957, 1958. What Black people was even interested in knowing anything about Africa? Maybe Paul Robeson, right? But King was in Ghana. He felt the need to be there. So he's always had this perspective, but he was always very measured in terms of when he would give a certain kind of analysis. I want to dedicate this talk to the brothers in Staten Island. The group is called True to Life, and they're my inspiration in terms of much of my work. And just recently, uh, you see the men standing in this frame. On the left-hand side, you go 1, 2, 3. That young man is Jalen. Jalen was found unresponsive last Wednesday. He died. So I'm dedicating this to him. Um, we don't know what was going on, what happened, but all we know is that this organization and the family are in tremendous pain. His loss. He was 28 years old. 28 years old. And if you see the person right in the center with the glasses on, that's Iron Mike. Iron Mike is his big brother. But because their father had died much earlier, Iron Mike really raised him. So now Iron Mike is suffering the loss of both his younger brother and his son because he raised him in the social. So these are the brothers and sisters that I love and respect so very much. So if we're going to solve gun violence, it's going to require that we take a new approach. And the new approach is going back, reclaiming ourselves. That's why we're using Wahimi Misu. That means what? It means rebirth, to restore Ma'at, order, balance, and harmony, reciprocity, truth, justice, compassion. Is bringing these factors back into our life. And I found that this clinical, therapeutical intervention called psychodrama can be very effective in that way, and I'm going to explain why. So, of course, anything we do, we have to make it our own, which means we have to make it African-centered. And so many of the symbols I use when I conduct these services are Adinkra symbols because they say so much. and people would actually choose a symbol when we start the session, and then they'll explain why they chose that symbol. So you're doing what you're creating relationships. It was my dear brother Joshua Lee, who's a phenomenal human being who does so much great work that it's hard to put it in a thimble. But he was my social worker, psychodrama supervisor, trainer. The model I use is called the therapeutic spiral method. That was created by Hudgens, and she, as you can see her pictured on the right, lower right hand side. I knew I was supposed to study that method because when I found out that she had not even through her own intention, but was coached by a native woman, and was had to go through um, a vision quest, was given an eagle feather, and that was a sign to me saying, okay, I'm in the right place. But she knew that she couldn't really teach me or assist me in my own growth and development while I was getting my doctorate. So Joshua was in fact my supervisor, trainer, and still is this very day. But this particular type of psychodrama, therapeutic spiral method, is an evolution from the classical psychodrama. What I mean by that is this: Moreno, who you see top left, was the one who created, and many of the things that we do in social work actually came from him, but he's not given the credit. Nonetheless, um, he was able to say, how do we use theater in a therapeutic fashion so that people can actually become themselves again, using what is called the authentic healing center. Everyone has this, or he calls it an authentic healing center. How do we get in touch with that again? How do we activate that again? This is what psychotrauma does. It helps people get in touch again with their authentic healing center and be able to share it with others. And the way that we know that one is making progress using this method is spontaneity, is something that shows up. Now, this is important to understand because what oppression wants to do is create predictability. It wants to be able to dictate exactly what's going to happen in such a fashion that in the end, whatever is produced, they will get the benefit and the people themselves will be undermined at the same time. So when we're moving from predictability to spontaneity, we know that that's a sign of liberation. That was another reason that made me feel that this was the right thing for me to study. What does it look like? Well, as we're talking about solving, or at least lessening the effects of the alpha, as we're talking about lessening the effects of historical trauma, we're saying that we have to understand our internalized psychic structures. That is to say, there's oppression, there's superiority of consciousness in terms of racism, but there's also inferiority in terms of consciousness, which is called internalized oppression. So the circle that you see on the right shows different stick figures. And let me give you a quick, brief understanding of that. Using the technique, we go through three phases. The first phase is called prescriptive roles, which is another way of saying strength roles. How do you build the strength? And the analogy I give is if somebody was going to go deep sea diving, really to the depths of the sea, they have to have on what? Iron or some way of protecting themselves from what? From the pressure. Psychodrama does the same thing. It protects you, it gives you a protective psychological barrier first before we start to deal with any of the issues. And I'll talk about that later. So that the prescriptive roles are the strengths, personal strengths, interpersonal strength, um, transpersonal strengths, right? We go through an exercise when you start to build those things on, and then we move into the trauma triangle, right? And you can see, you might not can see it, but the one pointing down is the protagonist. Um, and down pointing to the victim, which is also the wounded child, and then to the right is the abandoning authority. So that's the essence of the way we look at how trauma is internalized. Uh, and then the work that we do is finding out what those things are. I think that there's another aspect, which I'm still working out the theory of it, and that is I call it the passive aggressive agent provocateur. And what I mean by that is when war takes place, there are different agents that are put in motion to create desired effects. And one of those agents is called the provocateur, agent provocateur. And in our case here in the United States, there were many times when we were infiltrated and they were talking about blowing up the Statue of Liberty or blowing up this or blowing it. It wasn't the people themselves. It was somebody coming in inciting that. And many times they arrested people on these false charges. And so, in some cases, they were released or found innocent. In many cases, they was found guilty. But because we have internal, all of us, not them or those, all of us have internalized oppression. It comes out in different ways. So the thing is to not blame the person, but actually to blame and identify that energy that's taking place, that psychology that exists, and purge it, right? So so after we do different exercises, starts to explore any one of those trauma personalities or traits, all the way to the right is transformation. How then do you transform? So psychodrama is taking you through these three phases: the prescriptive phase, the trauma phase, and the transformative phase. So Wahimi Misu looks at a grounding, right, in that first phase, the strengthening, right, looking at problems. It doesn't have to be trauma necessary, but any kind of problem that a person or a family is going through, and then of course moving to the transformative phase. Now, you might be able to read this as not post-traumatic growth. You might say, well, what is that? There is truth to the fact that when we experience a trauma, there can be some positive effects. You probably know of something happening like this where someone was in a car accident or something tragic happened to them. And then prior to that, they didn't really have any spirituality, but they got spiritual after that, or maybe even religious, right? Maybe different insights come. So there are times when one gets a benefit or the best that they can get out of a situation like that. But I'm very careful to say it happens on a wholesale level. I talk about micro post-traumatic growth. Micro means like in that particular incident, one can grow from it, one can rebound from it. But because domestic colonialism still exists, because oppression still exists, we can't say that is really true post-traumatic growth because we haven't gotten past the things that's happening to create the trauma and pain in the first place. So if we look at the model that I created, the Wahini Misu Healing Well method, using those three phrases, I projected that we have to have a different way of engaging our people with a different language when we're talking about therapy. And you will notice that um, the healing the mind world, right? The internalized personal strength, that those kinds of exercises goes on from week 1 to 5. The second phase is healing the cultural wound, right? The interpersonal strengths. Internalized is the first one. Interpersonal strengths is starting to build in the second 5 weeks, 6 to 10. And then the last 5 weeks, 11 to 15, healing the village sacred hoop, communal strength. So for those of you who might know about social programs, they usually talk about when a group is over, we're terminating the group. We have to be careful about the words we use because we can't just take something and just ingest it and think it's going to resonate with our being and our relationship and our experience. It won't. We can still use the basic principles, but we have to change the wording such that it fits better with us. So instead of so people come into families come into Wahine Misu and they join the family circle. At the end, they join the village circle. So I didn't say you terminate anything we do. We don't want it to dissipate. We want to grow it. So we have to continue to organize and continue to grow our social strength and our social relationships, right? Our social institutions. So we have to, every time we do something, the question becomes, how do I expand it? How to continue it so this remains strong, but how do I expand it so it's starting to rebuild our cultural reality, our social ecology? In research, the method for one way of getting people to join something is called the recruitment strategy, which is using what is called convenience sampling. One person tells another person, tells another person. So the healing well, right? A healer in every home, a healing well in every home. I want to return to gun violence. Uh, in the last maybe 10 years, could be a little longer than that, people started to say gun violence is not just an individual thing. In fact, it's a group thing, it's a societal, it's a community thing. And one of the most popular public health approaches to solving gun violence, or at least reducing, is called cure violence. And this is the one of the public health interventions I'm familiar with after working with New York City for the last, what, 8 years, 8, 9 years. And what Cure Violence says is that violence is a community disease. Okay. And we can go with that. And therefore, the problem is gun violence, right? So disease is creating the violence, and then which is the problem, and the problem is solved by intervening in terms of retaliatory gun violence, right, which is the consequence. So cure violence, their strategy is looking at the problem itself, and the problem in terms of the actors, right, uh, the shooters as they're called. They used there was a doctor who used public health thinking, and what he did was to look at the disease, the pathogen, uh, who was interrupting the disease, so forth and so on. And then he created social roles that would duplicate the public health model, because when he came back from Africa, he looked at the map and saw the distribution of the gun violence in Chicago, and he said, "Wait a minute, it looks like looking at a diseased cell." And then he started to think, "Well, how can I start to work this in mathematics?" It says that A is equal to B, and if C is equal to B, then A and C is equal to each other. So if he used that rationale to create this whole strategy called cure violence, and it's been working. It's been shown in Chicago that when they were using it, the gun violence went down, and when they defunded it, the gun violence went up. So this has happened all throughout the country. We need to know about these interventions, and we have to participate in them. But let me say this to you: that's not enough, because all the things that's coming out, more likely than not, it's going to deal with the question of reform and not revolution. And what I mean by that, in terms of the thinking that actually defines the problem is not gun violence. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. If we say that community gun violence is the problem, you can see in this chart, which is different from the other chart I showed you, the determinant I'm saying is domestic colonialism, not the disease itself. I'm saying that that's the real determinant that's creating the problem, or I could even put in the middle, I can say, which is creating a disease, and that disease is creating, gun violence. But still, nonetheless, we have to deal with the consequences with retaliatory gun violence. FBI statistics show that anywhere from 75 to 95% of the gun violence that is continued is because of retaliatory gun violence. So that's where we have to draw our attention. That's where we have to put the work. So what Wahini Misu does is says, how do we get to those families and help them come up with a different solution rather than taking the life of the person who took the life of their loved one? That's where our work is. That's where we have to get involved. Right. So the strategy is directed to break gun violence, retaliatory gun violence shootings with families in with the Wahini Misu method. So going back to psychodrama, there's many what is called safety structures that we use. And one of the safety structures that we use is art, right? Because when we use art, we're using the left and the right side of our brain. And when you're solving trauma, that's what you want to do. You want to bring the cognition to the trauma imprints. And trauma doesn't it doesn't it's not stored in the frontal lobe. It's stored in the body itself. So that's why when something happens to a person, they can smell something and it can be a triggering effect. They can hear something and it can be a triggering effect. They can see something and it creates a triggering effect, right? Because the trauma gets bifurcated all throughout the body, but only when we can bring cognition to, and meet the left and right, meet the thinking, the analytical aspect with the emotional aspect, the psychological aspect, we can bring those two together. That is the way in which healing occurs. And isn't that interesting, right? Because when we think of the ankh is what? The symbol of the male and the female, the penis and the vagina, which creates what? The seed, which creates life. So here, even in trauma solutions, it's the ankh because it's the blueprint of the universe. So art is very important in terms of healing our trauma. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this uptick of violence throughout all of our domestic, our mid micro domestic colonies, because they have taken art out of the curriculum. They've taken um, gym out of the curriculum. They've taken all these things that was able to release the trauma and the pain and suffering and giving us endorphins so that we could feel happy about life, joyful about life. So there's a direct correlation between taking these types of interventions out of the school system and leaving the children bereft and empty and unresourced and angry and enraged. And the only thing they can do is express the rage. I have a theory. My theory is that gun violence, if we using A is equal, if A is equal to B, and if C is equal to B, then A and C are equal to another. Using that same logic, when we talk about um, food disorders like bulimia, it's been found it's not really the question of the food, it's really the question of power. When that person doesn't have power, they have found a way to do things with their body, feeling some sense of power at the expense of the body. Well, think about it. If our community is a whole organism that doesn't have power or haven't realized it yet, right? Well, could it be that the gun violence is one way in which it's getting expressed at the expense of what? At the expense of the body. I haven't written much about it. It's just like a very cloudy theory that I'm working with, but I think it's true. In psychodrama, we have something called telly, and telly is you can say something. I mean, you can hear someone's thoughts, or you can repeat some thoughts. And when we do these things, which is called doubling, it's amazing how the person standing behind someone else can actually say something to the person who's sitting in the chair, and it can be that right thing. Now they have the right to say no, it's off, it's on, but the mere fact that we can do that is incredible. There's so much stuff who we are as these divine manifested souls having a human experience. It's so many things about that that we don't know. Why? Because we live in a Eurocentric paradigm. All these things were understood in our African context, but certainly not in the European context. So anyway, art is very important, and we use art as one of the safety structures. So in social work, I'm a social worker. We talk about human understanding human behavior in the social environment, but not just social environment, in the historical environment, in the political environment. And of course, when we say that, then we're talking about the Mafia, we're talking about slavery, we're talking about genocide, we're talking about domestic colonialism. All these things blessings, family. We had somewhat of a technical difficulty. The thing I think for us to we are each other's medicine. We are each